Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the YDG Podcast. Today, we'll be looking at a very interesting topic. Who tells Africa's story? We'll be diving into media representation and the narrative problem. Today, turn to any major international news outlet, and you notice a pattern. Africa most frequently appears on stories of conflict, famine, and corruption. And anytime Africa's innovation, complexity, and creativity comes to bear, it is usually framed in a Western gaze that flattens 54 wonderful countries into a single undifferentiated narrative of struggle and need. This is not accidental. And as a result of structural inequalities in global media ownership, editorial decision-making, and the economics of international journalism. Today, I'm joined by 3 wonderful panelists, and we will discuss the narrative problem itself, who is behind the stories and how they are told about Africa, how do they affect Africans, and how do we shift the balancing power of storytelling. I'll let my panelists introduce themselves, and we'll take it from there. So you can start. Look.
Hi, my name is Chleo-Patra Awonpomi Azantilow. I'm a member of the YDG Cohort 6. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, my name is Richmond Fordjour Ampofo, a journalist with Diplomatic Times.
Hello, everyone. My name is Pamela Tammy Darkowaah Manu. I'm also a delegate of the Young Diplomats of Ghana Cohort 6, as well as the chief delegates. And I'm also excited to be here to have this conversation.
Yes, thank you so much. And I must say, our panelists today have in-depth knowledge on this topic. If I start, so Cleo.
Yes.
People often think that the narrative problem is a modern frustration, but some others have also raised the idea that it is, as an aspect, it is traced back to the colonial era. What do you think about it?
Okay, so first and foremost, it even transcends the colonial era. And I'd like to give a historiography of how even modern journalism started. Because, before modern electronic system of sharing news was created, it was the printing press that was used. So right from the 14th, 15th century, you had the Gutenberg press. And the Gutenberg press allowed media owners to be able to print news at a particular point in time and then distribute it. Mm-hmm. But when European powers started expanding their colonial influences into Mesoamerica, and then later the African question that happened after the partition of Berlin, the Spanish and the Portuguese already were using media as a way to be able to control narratives existing within their colonies. And that was how they were able to hide the atrocities that occurred in many of the colonies in current-day Southern America. But then much of what we actually have in our modern-day world has been able to exist based on the introduction of the telegraph. And that is why we have now wire systems or agencies or wire news. Because when the telegraph was introduced as a means of sharing information in the 18th century, it revolutionized how information was being shared. But then the people who were controlling the telegraph were not people who were, if I should say, they did it because they had values for independent sharing of news. No, they did it because it was more commercial, it was going to be profitable, and it was just simply them trying to feed the market that actually existed. And that is what has transcended from then till now. And then we have agencies, the wire agencies, from which a lot of the international broadcasting systems drive their media feed from. So I just hope that this analysis is able to bring to light how this actually started. Yeah.
So, Pamela, let me go to you. They say ladies first. How do you think the Cold War geopolitics how do you think it has affected Africa and how Africa is being reported?
Yeah, so during the Cold War, Africa wasn't merely reported as a continent with newly independent states. Usually, it was through the lens of the West versus the East, their rivalry. And so even when there would be a coup d'etat or a civil war happening, international observers weren't asking questions like, what do these people want? It was always, how does this benefit the West or the East? Or what superpower is influencing these causes on the continent? And so you notice that even though we had great men like Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, Patrice Lumumba, Julius Nyerere, just to mention a few, when they had amazing political visions for their countries, but then most often it was reduced to which superpower they were most linked to or which superpower had influence over them. And so I believe that did stripe Africa of our agency because international observers weren't able to really see the full story. And that really does remind me of Chimamanda's TED Talk on this danger of a single story, where she reminds us that the problem isn't that stereotypes are untrue, but they're just incomplete. And I believe that that's what happened during the Cold War. Lots of the stories went off incomplete, and that's what has influenced global views of the African continent. And so I hope that does answer your question.
Yeah. When Cleo was talking, she mentioned wire services.
Yeah.
So right now we have wire services like routers, AFP. These wire services draft the African news to the world.
Not just the African, like the entire
globally,
the entire global scope of news, actually.
To the world generally. Who owns these wire services and how does that feed into what story is being told and how Africa is presented?
Well, I think media ownership is one key thing that comes to play when it comes to narratives. First of all, we as journalists, there are so many theories that underpin what we do. One is the framing theory. For instance, I remember one time I was watching TV and I tried to stretch my neck if I could see what was happening at the other end. And I remember that, oh, come on, this is the screen. So you can just see from the screen. Beyond the screen, you can't see beyond that one. So that, if you're talking about narratives of Africa, the first thing I want to talk about is about the theories that underpin the journalism that we are doing. You have the agenda setting theory, where you realize that almost when you wake up in the morning, there's one news that is running through. If you tune into CNN, you're talking about one thing. If you tune into, let's say, even
Al Jazeera,
you're talking about one similar thing. That is the agenda setting theory. Now, they set agenda that this is what we're going to talk about. This is what they think is quite important. And even with that one, there's a gatekeeping theory. There are so many theories. Sorry, there are so many stories. But they decide that this is the story that we want to talk about. So it's more like a gatekeeper. The editor is the person who opens the gate. This story comes in. You don't come in. This story comes in. This is not talked about. So I would like us to understand that we as journalists, in as much as people will be like, no, journalists are not trying their best and all this stuff. I know that will be talked about, sanctuary upon journalists. But there are certain theories that underpin what we do. I've mentioned the framing theory, where we can choose how we frame something. Let's say people had issues when they framed Aman Wutan, that is the Somalian referee was denied entry into the US. People were questioning why they said Somalian referee. But we know the geopolitics behind this whole issue.
It could have just been made a referee. Like just a referee has been denied. And
you see, if you make it a referee has been denied, you lose the whole context behind why he has been denied.
Yeah.
You get it? That is why sometimes we frame it that way, so that we know where we are telling our story from. We've pegged it on an angle. So we are choosing, it's a big story. You can talk about so many things with regards to that story. But because you want to highlight that issue between the US and Somalia, that is why you choose that angle. You get me? So before you even talk about wire service, media ownership is very important. If you are watching the CNN, you are watching Fox, how Fox reports one thing is different from how CNN reports one thing. So media ownership comes in, and that is one important thing that decides how news is being reported. Over here in Ghana, even Daily Graphic reports something differently, and you go and see Daily Guide report another thing different.
With a different headline.
Exactly. So basically, I'll say when it comes to these wire services, if we don't know the person owning it, sometimes it's just a conglomerate. It is not just one person owning it. And even if it's one person owning it, the ideologies that underpin that they work with, that is what determines how the story is being told. Basically, that's how I put it.
Okay. we mentioned that BBC Africa exists, CNN Africa exists. There are several African channels and programs. On the outside, it looks like this is progress. But my question is coverage or a lot of coverage automatically mean proper coverage or deeper coverage?
Well, I don't think that's the case. It should be more about depth than necessarily coverage. Depth because there must be an opportunity to intricately observe the story and report it for what it truly is and how it truly affects the people that are around it. So for instance, recently the issue of xenophobia started happening in South Africa. And we had a lot of major international agencies, even Ghanaian news agencies reporting on it. The major headline will be xenophobia arises, or South Africans are what's xenophobic, or xenophobia is arising in South Africa again. But the context is the issue of xenophobia or the frustrations many South Africans are having against foreigners. It's not necessarily because they don't want foreigners, but it is also out of an economic and socially structural problem. Unemployment is on the rise in South Africa. People don't think they're getting jobs. They don't think that their government is being attentive to the needs of South Africans. So the framing could have, instead of, say, South Africans are xenophobic to foreigners, the framing could have been, out as a result of economic frustration, South Africans repel foreigners. That's the context, you understand me? I don't think that having African outlets for major corporations is enough. Because then again, sometimes when you watch the BBC Africa segment, it's not even more than it seems like a watershed moment out of the main news agent, component of it. And they try to do same for Singapore. I think there's an East Asia, BBC Singapore and all those things as well. But still, it does not mean that the stories that matter are the ones that are always going to be highlighted. Like he mentioned, the underpinning theories that exist within these modern day corporations will always influence the story being told, regardless of whether there's an African outlet or not. So, yeah.
So, Pamela, as a young diplomat as yourself, what do you think are the diplomatic consequences when a foreign correspondence bureau closes in, let's say, Accra? Let's say this Accra.
Okay, so when foreign correspondents find their way in the continents, in this relation we're speaking about in Accra, not only are they giving headlines to their headquarters outside of Africa, but they're also engaging with the civilians. They're getting to know not just the debt crisis, but they're also learning about our culture. They're engaging with our people and all that. And so they get to see the everyday news of an individual Ghanaian who sits in front of their TV and watch TV3, right? And so they get to hear of these stories of innovation. They get to hear of these stories about entrepreneurship, sustainability, and all that. And so if foreign correspondents is to close their office, that would now mean that Ghana is not being represented in that case. But in relation to what Chleo-Patra said, just because foreign correspondents are in Accra or are in any country in Africa, that doesn't necessarily mean that news concerning the positives in a country are being sent to the headquarters, because again, sometimes segments are reduced to a little time frame. And so I believe that it does have its implications because again, in international relations, visibility does matter because it's through these media outlets that diplomats, investors, all these people, they rely on these media outlets to get information from a country. And so again, I would say that, so if all the time we hear news about crisis, it sort of brands the country as that's all it's about. And so which investor would want to come and take the risk of investing in a country where it's about crisis?
Usually always the case. Because
exactly.
If the foreign correspondent is taking an interest, it is always going to be in the matter of the crisis. What is going to be sensational enough to share a media story?
Exactly.
And so all the time, if they're going to report our Burkina Faso, they're going to report there was a coup d'etat. oh, he has sacked away foreigners. Oh, we are going to fight against France.
Yeah.
All these things are signaling. But they probably will not come and report on, say, oh, maybe Ibrahim Traore has bought this for the Burkina Faso people. Maybe he has gone to do this with these people. And you can even, if I was to make the counterfactual, me in Ghana, for instance, how first and foremost, most news about Ghana, luckily we are a democratic country.
Exactly.
And so at least at times the
beauty.
framings are a bit more beneficial to us. But then again, even our own media stations, we've seen the power of their influence and how they are able to use certain stories and create certain perceptions which negatively influence how news is being perceived. And now with the rise of digital media as well, now we have bloggers and influencers and co. It becomes a bit dicey actually to know who is the one actually really
Giving credible information.
credible. And no, there's one thing I always say. I say that if you want to interrogate news in Ghana, ask yourself 2 questions. Who does it benefit? If you ask yourself who the news benefits in the long run, then you ask yourself, what will somebody gain as a result of that news spreading?
Exactly.
Sometimes if you are able to outlayer the news within that perspective, that's how you're able to know in the long run how this news is going to affect people in the long run.
That's wonderful. But Rich, as a seasoned journalist that you are, give us a perspective. What's your honest opinion or perspective on our own African media? Because anytime I turn on the news, I look through the graphic, I go to social media to check on our African journalists. You always see them pushing the same agenda. They are always following the scandal because they want clicks. They want more people to buy papers, so they are always reporting on conflicts, reporting on scandals, reporting on corruption. Meanwhile, we are always turning our heads to the Western outlets and saying they are the ones doing this. So give me your honest opinion of our own media and how we can, what the problem is and how we can move from there.
I think African media has done quite well. Yeah, that is what I'll say. But we know we are complicit when it comes to certain aspects because we've not told the total story, even our own story. Yeah, because sometimes how we frame the thing, that is why I mentioned media ownership is very important. If you are with a media house, let's say Wontumi TV, certainly you're going to speak in favor of the NPP. And we know that recently the NPP, they went about petitioning the EU, petitioning the diplomatic corps that the NDC is actually persecuting them on matters of free speech. You get it? So if an issue comes like that, Wontumi TV will not, let's say, report it accurately to let us understand what these people did. But they will call the phone ins that they will do, the people that they will call, the very message that they will actually give will reinforce their ideology. You get me?
Yeah.
And we recently also saw that just read a story on the fact that Mama is repressing free speech. And you see, these things, you get certain media houses that echo it, and certain media houses will not echo it. It's all about ownership. Ownership plays an important role, and Africa has done quite well, but I believe there's so much to be done, and we are still learning a lot. Africa's media has struggled from post-independence because you realize that anytime there is a military coup d'etat, they try to use the media for their benefit. And so Africa's media has gone through so much struggles, especially when it comes to Ghana. And telling our story, I think we've done quite well over the years. We've done so because let's use the passage of the anti-gay bill as an example. Yeah. When we passed that bill, most of the headlines in Ghana was Ghana passes anti-gay bill. But if you look at DW, they wrote that Ghana passes draconian laws. To us, we are protecting our family values. But to them, they don't get it why they are trying to jail someone for who they think they are. You get it? So from the African perspective, we told our story how we want it to be told. Because when it comes to issues of the LGBTQI community, Ghana has not really been in support of that thing. And so we realize that even in our media reportage, we tend to reinforce that very thing. We try to call people who actually align with what we think. So with the African story, I think we've told it the African way, but we could do better.
Can I just add a bit to that part? I think much of it is also a problem diagnosis. And the fact still remains that journalism is heavily under rewarding in Africa. Because there's not available infrastructure that has existed to be able to develop journalism to the level it should reach for the way Western media and co. The infrastructure does not exist. The capacity building programs and co. You are going for capacity training and it's a foreign agency that is sponsoring it, say USAID or DW and co. The same foreign media outlets that we claim are skewing narratives. And yet we are also, these are the people that are giving scholarships to journalists and co. Come, let's do training for you. So I think there needs to be a concerted effort on building an architecture for journalism in Africa. First and foremost, you'll be surprised that you will know more about an election happening in the US than an election happening in Togo or nearby Benin or even Ivory Coast. Yes. And why should that be the case when they are actually our next door neighbors? There are low investigative budgets. People are not, if you do not have like if I should say global credence to even want to undertake such investigation, like maybe people like Anas Arimeyal, Manasseh Azure and co, they at least have been out there, and so they've been able to have people back them and give them funding in order to be able to embark on investigative journalism.
Exactly.
But how many people would want to do that a form of investigative journalism? It's a few people. And then the problem are also about protection for journalists as well. We were in Ghana here when Ahmed Swali was killed in 2019, and still nobody knows how he was killed, who is the perpetrator behind it. This is more than 6 years ago. So it's more of a matter of the environment has not been created to develop the African media story to its potential. If our media houses had the funding and the resources to be able to build an architecture that interlinks every African media house such that we replicate what the wire systems are doing, then I think we would be making a lot of advancement. Because if there's news about happening in another country, I shouldn't wait for Al Jazeera to tell me. If it's an African country, there should be an African wire system in place. And that African wire system will now rather be doing the reporting for various African countries. And that's how you're able to control the narrative, because at the end of the day, also that media system competes with the existing wire systems that exist. And then the Western media houses will be left in a quagmire. Which headlines are we actually picking?
You mentioned funding.
Who
again funds the African
and so it's now, because already you've indicated that it's a matter of ideology. I think if you are looking in terms of the African perspective, the tendency for the state to be heavily involved in African media is high, especially when, it's over, like maybe a state that is a bit authoritative and cool. So it must take, if I should say, partnership between the state and then private individuals to be able to come to a consensus as to how the infrastructure for African media houses is going to be developed. Then again, also, in principle, you could say that it should be the private individual. The private individual, because the media is regarded as the fourth estate of the world. And so irrespective of the person that is doing it, as long as it's a private individual putting the resources to be able to develop the potential of the media houses, someone can say that's principally justified. Someone can also say in the long run that is an attempt to skew the narrative of someone creating another means through which they are going to extend their influence. But I think at the end of the day, all is fair. Because whether you like it or not, even whichever private individual is going to do that, they are doing that to extend their influence. So the most important thing is the existing mechanisms exist for funding, and then you are able to put checks on each other in order to ensure that you are checking each other. Because, for instance, in the US, you have Fox News and you have, say, NBC. One is more leftist leaning, one is more right leaning. And then they check themselves at the end of the day. I don't think so many problems can be dealt with at a go. But I think when there are checking mechanisms for the media houses and they are checking each other, that is what is going to make journalism even stronger.
To hint on your initial point, about 3 weeks ago in Bamako, Mali, we had the inaugural Pan-African Media Forum, and it was a union of so many seasoned journalists, media practitioners across the whole Africa who met to talk about the Pan-African, creating a Pan-African media, just as Chleo was talking about. So creating a Pan-African media and regaining the African story, tell it in our own narrative.
Okay.
What do you think are the challenges to that? And how do you think we can achieve that goal with the current fragmentation of our African continent?
So to add up to that question, Patra has basically like summed it all for us, right? But then I believe that dialogues like that are very important because it just proves that there are weak systems in place when it comes to our media. We cannot fight against the fact that there are media organizations out there that do sort of have a certain type of monopoly when it comes to sharing information in the world we have today. And so some of the challenges do include the fragmentation problem because again, as she said, as a young Ghanaian, you go and speak to any Ghanaian and they'll know more about what's happening in the US than what's happening in a neighboring country. Why is this so? Because we don't have a unified or an independent body which is able to represent all 54 countries with this continent has over 2,000 languages with so many ethnic groups, so many people, such a diverse continent. And so it will be very difficult to do that. But once we recognize these challenges, as Patra has already stated, in terms of political, in terms of economics, fragmentation, I believe that we'd be able to at least come to a standing ground when it comes to checking. We'd be able to do that as countries where we have systems in place where if one country is, reporting certain happenings in another country, they would be able to also give their views, not just from their standing point, but from that country's standing point as well.
So we spent a lot of time talking about the structural problem. I want us to end very, 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 we have to end this conversation very practically, if I must say.
In a succinct way possible. I think, first and foremost, just taking inspiration from what Pamela was saying, if we want to have a Pan-African media outlet or a media that is grounded in what is the modern day Pan-African system, probably we can look at it in the light of continental governance. And when I say continental governance, the AU as a body, the Pan-African Media Foundation, the media journalists, petitioning the AU for the creation of a Pan-African Media Forum and representation in the AU, permanent representation in the AU. What does this look like? It will look like probably a charter that actually institutionalizes what we want to do. And because naturally you are embedding it in the AU system, then the funding or the resources, the mechanism would naturally cave out. But then again, you are trying to separate it from influence. And so this is where you now create opportunity for bidders, private bidders, to come and invest in the media system, the creation of a network that is purely Pan-African in essence, while at the same time also ensures that it tells the African story the way we want to. So my concluding remarks, I think that can be something that can be pursued, and hopefully one day we have a true representation of what Africa should look like.
So quick one. One actionable thing that, let's say, a young diplomat, a young lawyer, a young journalist can do today, not a philosophy and action that we can do today to help change the narrative, to help tell African story. You can start, Rich.
You may not really get the airtime fully on TV to do what you want to do, but we have social media. As a young journalist, I think we can use social media to advantage to tell the African story quite better, because with that one, no one is giving you this allocated time, that 4 minutes, 5 minutes. But because most journalists have social media handles, sometimes certain stories don't even do it on TV. They do it via the social media. So I believe social media is to advantage, and every young journalist should use social media to tell the African story quite better than they do in the news show.
Yeah. So, Pamela.
Again, so I'll say that you should engage with podcasts like Young Diplomats of Ghana podcast, where we speak about interesting topics on the continent, because it's only through here that you get to hear all of these conversations with highly, educated people like ourselves. And so I'll say engage with podcasts like this. And also, whenever you see a headline out there, like Patra said, ask yourself, whose voice is this? Whose voices are missing, and who is benefiting from this? These are 3 important questions to ask yourself, and you know how to engage with that piece of media.
Chleo-Patra?
I think everybody has said everything now, so I have nothing to say. Just when you grow people, you will grow Africa and you will grow Ghana. So grow people, grow Ghana. Yeah.
Amazing.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much for sticking with us. I have been your host. My name is Micheal Fosu, and catch you on the next episode.